Welcome, folks, to our podcast, Therapy on the Tangent. I'm Natalie with my co-host, Zori. Say hi, Zori.
Hi, folks.
And this is a podcast where two therapists geek out on their geeky passions and mental health. So, Zori, what have you been nerding out on lately?
So recently, I've been playing this game called Cabernet, and it's basically like old-fashioned vampires, basically. So it's one of those games where your choices has impacts on how the story goes. It was originally only out on Steam, but now it's out on Switch, I know for sure. And it's really good. It's really interesting. Basically, you play as this female doctor of this like not really described Eastern European land, and she wakes up one day as a vampire. So part of it is just getting used to her new abilities and her new life, and you get to meet a lot of different characters, some who are vampires, some who are not vampires, and yeah, it's just really cool. And it's, from what I understand, it was by either like a really small indie gaming company, or it was by one person who developed it. Either way, it's not a big gaming company, and despite that, it's really cool. It's really interesting. The plot's great. I really like the characters. I will probably finish it, and then I'll probably try again with some different with some different choices, because either you can try to keep your humanity in the game, or you can just like fall into your greed, fall into your wants, your desires, and stuff like that. And right now I'm trying to keep my humanity as much as possible, but maybe the next time around I'll be greedy, or maybe the next time around I'll try to get like 50-50, because that is an option that you can get with the game as well. And yeah, I really like it. So it's called Cabernet. Check it out if you're interested. Though, do you know that it does have some things like death and suicide? I mean, it's vampire, so some of that's going to be there. But if those are things that you can know, strongly recommend.
That's pretty cool. It sounds like it's like a visual novel kind of game.
Yes. It's a visual novel. It's a visual novel RPG where your choices matter.
Mm-hmm. Just like in real life, your choices matter.
Yeah, even though I wish I could like go back to the save point, start again, but like, oops, that was embarrassing. Right. Let's do that again. But Natalie, what are you nerding out about?
Social media sometimes really gets to me, and it's like you click on one link and then all of a sudden you see the same thing in different ways, like different things, like different ads and recommendeds and stuff. So I clicked on one link about like a DIY like cat tower, catio kind of thing, because I thought it was cool. And then all of a sudden now I have like all these like targeted ads and reels and suggested posts for me to look at of like DIY cat trees and cat towers, things like that. And something that I've been increasingly more interested in is like, can I actually woodwork? It can't be that hard, right? It's just screws, wood. You make a box and you make a bunch of boxes in different configurations, right? So that's something that I've been kind of like geeking out on a little bit, like researching, is this actually something I could do? Is it as easy as it is in my head? Because I try to do like very simple things, which is essentially me just like screwing wood together so that it's a box. Mm-hmm. And then you use the box in different ways. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's like numbers and math that comes into play, fractions.
Well, I'm sure there's something, I don't know. I mean, if they're cat towers, how much structural integrity do I need? It's not like I'm building a house, right? It's just something that will hold like 12 pounds or like 20 pounds of cat.
Each or total?
Oh, total.
Because, like, how big are because I was trying to think of how big Neptune and Loki were. And I was wow, 20 pound cat, like, that's big.
Yeah, that's a huge cat. But Neptune's like, it's like 7 pounds. And I think Loki's like 9 pounds.
Okay, that makes sense. Neptune's a baby.
Yeah, Neptune's a baby. But this is just me thinking like, oh, that's easy. I could do that. That doesn't seem that hard. Just screw some wood together. So that's what I've been really into lately. But anyway, today's episode, we're going to be talking about Disney princesses, which I think we have a
Ooh.
long history and a journey with Disney princesses. So, well, maybe first off, like Zori, what are some of your favorite Disney princesses and why?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay. So first, Mulan, even though again, she's not a Disney princess, so I don't understand the Disney princess lineup, how certain characters are Disney princesses, whatever. But anyway, Mulan, she in my opinion had the best story, had the best soundtrack. There's not a day that I do not have Be a Man playing in the back of my head at some point, or Will Bring Honor to Us All,
Mm-hmm.
especially when I'm getting ready and I'm trying to look like a human. Especially the part where it goes, ancestors, hear my prayer. Okay, I'm not gonna sing it, but it's like, ancestors, hear my prayers. Help me not to make a fool out of me, or something like that. I'm like,
Mm.
yes, ancestors, help me not to be a fool, make a fool out of myself every day.
That's a good mantra just to start the day.
Yeah. So Mulan, and also like Mulan is very fond in the LGBTQ plus community. So I like Mulan, and then I also like Tiana. I do like Tiana. I like her characterization. I wish she wasn't a frog majority of the movie, but I do like Tiana. I am sad that Disney canceled her TV show. They didn't cancel Rapunzel's TV show. Okay, no, I think technically at one point they did cancel Rapunzel's TV show, but still, Rapunzel at least got a TV show. But yeah, Mulan, Tiana, and honestly, all the other like favorite Disney characters, or at least favorite female Disney characters, Natalie and I just found out are not considered Disney princesses. Because I'm thinking of, like, Meg from Hercules.
Mm-hmm. Not real
She's a
princess.
baddie. Not a princess. And Jane from Tarzan, not a princess. So yeah, I think those are, according to Disney, in terms of their Disney princess lineup. Mulan, who's not a princess, but she has somehow made made the list, and Tiana. Oh, and I use Belle too. So Beauty and the Beast used to be like my mom's favorite Disney movie. Maybe it still is. I don't know. I haven't asked her in a long time, but I just remember when I was younger, she would like to watch like Beauty and the Beast. And I remember one time, little baby Zori wanted a Belle costume
Oh.
dress, but little baby Zori was like, "I'm not white," and that's a whole different story about how even young children can recognize racism.
Mm.
But yeah, Belle, because I used to like reading books. I mean, I still like reading books, but I don't have time to read books. But like, I was like, yes, Belle just wants to read books. Belle just wants a big library. Like, people talk about Belle having Stockholm syndrome. I don't think she has Stockholm syndrome. I think she just knew that she couldn't have the big library unless she stayed with this beast. So she was just like, I like books. He has books. The fool Gaston back in the village doesn't have books, doesn't like books. So let me just stay with this beast dude. He's a little hairy, but it'll be fine. Just you know, clean up his shedding just every few days or so.
Right, a mutually beneficial relationship.
But yeah, so I guess those are my top three
Mm-hmm.
Disney princesses. What about you?
Yeah, so my favorite Disney princesses, so Princess Jasmine from Aladdin, Mulan definitely up there, and Moana. And I think I am drawn to these Disney princesses that are like your non-traditional idea of like a princess. I mean, technically, Princess Jasmine was actually a princess in the show, but she was very much like on the rebel end of like, I'm gonna go see what it's like to live outside the palace walls, to be amongst the commoners and things like that. Like she was very much like not this like your traditional idea of a princess of like, oh, I'm dainty. I'm gonna stay in the castle walls. I'm gonna be taken care of, things like that. So I think I really enjoy like the Disney princesses that were a little bit of a rebel, had like their own thoughts. Like Moana, I absolutely loved because it was just like everybody was so against like her trying to go out and explore and to see different things, and you know she didn't want to just do what everybody was telling her to do in the village. She wanted to like see for herself, learn new things. So I think that's something that I really appreciated just from like those kinds of characters, that like it wasn't quite your traditional idea of like what a Disney princess should be. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
reflects a little bit of my personality too, which is why I think like I really enjoy those characters. And for those of you who don't know who are the official Disney princesses according to Disney, so we have Snow White, Cinderella, Aurora, Ariel, Belle, Jasmine, Pocahontas, Mulan, Tiana, Rapunzel, Merida, Moana, and Rhea. And to be totally honest, I actually haven't seen Brave or Raya the Last Dragon, but I did hear that they were good.
Yeah, they were good. I still don't understand how Anna and Elsa aren't Disney princesses. I mean, I know technically by now both of them are queens, I guess. But like again, Mulan is not a Disney princess. I'm not trying to like, I love Mulan. I love our homegirl Mulan, but like she's not a Disney princess. She's not a princess.
Mm-hmm.
Like a general, maybe, at some point, but like she's not a princess. So I don't understand Disney's ranking system.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so Disney princesses. So you have your fave, I have my faves. I guess, Natalie, what are some ways that you think Disney princesses, or have you seen Disney princesses come up in your work with clients, or when you think of mental health in general?
Well, I think so. Like working with kids, a lot of times, I think you do see that come out a lot as like the idealized feminine figure for some kids, particularly like young girls who are just like almost like a coming of age kind of life stage where they're trying to learn about like what it means to be a girl. And I don't want to say like quite a woman, because I think when we look at the Disney princesses, they're very much still in that age of like they're still girls.
Some of them are as young as 14.
Right. Like there's still like I don't think we really recognize that when we're watching the movies, but like a lot of these Disney princesses are like in their teens, like they're adolescents. So I
Mm-hmm.
think like it makes sense that that's where it starts to appeal to like girls who are just like in the pre-adolescent adolescent stage. But I think they're looking for I guess like these models of what it means to be like a woman, to be a girl. And so I think Disney princesses tend to be like your more traditional idea of like where do you go to for those things. But I also think we've seen such an evolution with like Disney princesses. Snow White's the first Disney princess that was introduced to us, versus like the most recent one, which is Rhea from Raya and the Last Dragon, right? And so like there's such a big difference in like how princesses were conceptualized, or even like girls were conceptualized in like back in the day, in like what nine, let's see, when was Snow White? Snow White came out in 1937. So that was like the idea of like girlhood, womanhood, versus like what does it look
Mm-hmm.
like now in the present. So I think like that's where that kind of comes up when people are trying to think about like their own identity formation.
Yeah, no, I agree because I definitely think it's not the most liberal version of like girlhood, but it's definitely, I think if you order up the Disney princesses in a lineup by when they came out, you definitely see like some idea of like what girlhood should be, or like the quote unquote ideal girlhood. And like even thinking about someone like Belle or Mulan, like they came out, so Beauty and Beast I believe came out in the like 90s along with like Ariel. I think they're considered, and maybe Mulan too, but I know like Beauty and Beast, Little Mermaid are considered like the Disney Renaissance. And in the 90s, we start to see a lot more still like girly girls, but like they have more characteristics, or at least because and we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but like, I think oftentimes some of the earlier Disney princesses, like Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella and Snow White, they get a lot of like flack for, just like randomly getting saved by this quote unquote attractive like Prince Charming, and then they live happily ever after, but they don't really do anything for themselves. And again, we'll talk about this later, but it's like they do stuff. It's just a lot. It's a lot more, I guess, subtle if you think about it, in terms of how they are their own heroes in their story versus Belle or Mulan or even the Ariel, where like, they're still like the prince or like the male protagonist who helps them in some way, shape, or form. But we start to actually see them kind of fight back a little. Like, I'm thinking back to like Ariel, and it's been a while since I've seen like the OG Little Mermaid cartoon, but I'm pretty sure there's a point where she uses a trident to like spear Ursula. And then in Belle, I think she like hits someone, I feel like, who's maybe Gaston, who's attacking the beast. I know Mulan, obviously, she's fighting, and we see them in like more quote unquote like active, and I keep saying quote unquote, but like more active roles than we did in the earlier princesses. And I feel then with some of the later ones, like, again, I know this is not technically Disney princess, but like Frozen, Rapunzel, Raya, and we keep saying Raya. Is it Raya or Rhea?
Oh, Rhea.
Is it Rhea? Okay, Rhea and Merida and Brave. We start seeing like still like that same, I guess you could call it spunkiness that we saw in the 90s and early 2000s, but a little bit more developed. Like, is it the most developed characterization of women that could be out there? No, not really, but still, it is a shift from even like the 90s portrayal, where not only are they saving themselves in some way and saving others in some way, but like also we start to see a little bit more of their personalities in terms of like interests and stuff like that. Because even thinking back to Mulan, which is like, again, OG fave, love Mulan, the cartoon, not the live action. We don't talk about that one. But like even Mulan, I'm trying to think of like what was she interested in, I can't really think of it. Like her family, which is important, but like I can't really think of anything that was like uniquely unique to her. Versus like Rapunzel, I knew she was interested in arts. I knew she was interested in exploring. Like, there are these elements of those Disney princess where it's like, okay, yeah, they're not just the damsels in distress. Yeah, they're not just waiting for the prince to save them. They not only are their own heroes, but they also have like their own kind of goals outside of being the hero, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's definitely a progression, I would say. And I definitely think you can get an idea depending on like the princess and comparing that to like what year it came out of like either, and I don't know if this is necessarily society, but at least what Disney thinks girlhood is at that point. I think that can kind of give an indication.
Right. And that's some really good observations you made just about some of the evolution of like how much we actually know about the female protagonist in these movies. Because I'm thinking even about like the earlier Disney princesses like Snow White, Cinderella, Aurora. I don't know much about them other than like what their situation was, right? All I know is like Cinderella like taught to mice, and we're friends with the animals, and Snow White was with the seven dwarves, and I actually know very little about Aurora. I don't know if we got a whole lot of like character from Aurora herself.
She slept.
Right. Which again, that is like the dream for some of us who are like older and tired, like to just sleep forever until, somebody comes along and like changes our lives. That'd be great. But maybe not, have that be our whole lives.
Yeah.
But there's definitely like a shift from even like the romanticizing of things too. Because I think the earlier Disney princesses, it was very heavy on like the romanticizing of like a woman needing a man in order to like be fulfilled. Like that was a happy ending. Like you got your Prince Charming and then that was the end of it. That was the whole story. Whereas like I feel like when we got to some of the later Disney princesses, it was very clear like some of them didn't require, a man in order to have like happy ending. They had different versions of what it looked like to be fulfilled in their life. Whereas like, some of the earlier, even like the I guess like the early 2000s and 90s Disney princesses, there was still some elements of like needing a man in order for the story to be complete.
Yeah, but one thing that I did think about while you were talking and saying like needed men, I think the earlier ones like Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, I think they always ended in like a wedding, in a marriage. And then the 90s, early 2000s, they didn't, or at least not as often. So that is like a slight shift. You don't need a man, but you.
Right. Well, what do you think that means for like, I guess like for girls to be watching these Disney princess movies now? Like, I don't know if many of them really ever watch like some of the older Disney princess movies, but like, I guess like what do you think like? I'm trying to articulate this question better. Like, what do you think girls are like picking up and learning from like watching these Disney princesses?
I mean, I guess you could take it like one or two ways. You could take it like being nice, being kind, having, magic, standing up for yourself, standing up for what's right. I think that that's ideally what Disney wants. I think, and I mean, I think it depends also on like what else girls are like, um, taking in terms of other medias. So like if they're taking in like a whole bunch of like Snow White and Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty, where again like the happy ending is getting married, or riding off into the sunset with the prince. I do think that does, especially if they're getting that information from other elements as well, like other media as well. I think it does like kind of put, at the very least, an emphasis on like marriage or romantic relationships as being super important instead of like other types of relationships like friendships as so I think that can be, I don't think Disney movies by themselves do that, but I think if that again is like the only type of like kind of media where again it's like you can't have this happily ever after until you marry, or even that like happily ever afters come once you're married, like your life will get better once you're married, and we know that's not true. Like there's still a lot of life after marriage if you do even choose to get married. But I do think, if girls are taking in a lot of media like that, and that's the only type of media, then it does kind of create this cis heteronormative, aka basically like this idea that there's like one way to be feminine, one way to do relationships. And that may not be healthy, and that may not be something that, especially some of those girls, or children in general, later on in their life, like feel like they align with. But because that's the only thing that they kind of got or received, it makes them feel like they're other or like something's wrong with them. So, there's a lot of things that we can blame Disney for, but I'll say that you can't necessarily just blame Snow White or Cinderella, or Sleeping Beauty solely for a whole girl's outlet. It's like the whole collection of media that this girl is taking in or this child is taking in.
Right. That is a good point because I do think a lot of these Disney princesses are representative of like certain times of society. and what the expectations were of girls and women, and what even like the values were around that time. Because I could see, you know, a lot of the earlier Disney movies, like the values are around marriage because that was how women were able to just survive in society. Like if you didn't have a husband, you weren't going to be able to provide for yourself. You weren't going to be able to support yourself because society didn't allow for you to like work a meaningful job or just be able to have that kind of independence outside of marriage. So I could see how like, you know, we can't blame the Disney movies for that. That's just reflective of society at that moment. But I think Disney movies also, I think, have some more depth to it. And I think maybe some of these Disney princesses actually have a little bit more depth to it than we think sometimes. Like you were talking about like this different idea of like Belle, where, you know, a lot of people do talk about like, you know, Stockholm syndrome, that she's like stuck in the tower or stuck in a castle there with Beast and she doesn't actually want to be there. But then like you look at it in different ways, like, well, Belle got a lot of things that she wanted there and she wasn't necessarily unhappy, right? So I guess like maybe that's a different way we need to look at some of these other like more traditional views of like our Disney princesses.
Yeah, because I'm gonna be completely honest. If I was stuck in a castle with a beast who was much nicer, you know, on the nicer end of things, I'd be like, yeah, let's
Mm-hmm.
let me just stay here and chill here. But you know, that also makes me think about some of the older Disney princesses, like Cinderella, for example. I know Cinderella gets like a lot of flack for, you know, just being too nice. Like, you know, if her stepmother and step siblings were so mean to her, why didn't she like go away? Why didn't she leave herself? Why didn't she do something? Why did she have to wait until like this Prince Charming came with her glass slipper to escape? And again, you know, thinking back to like when these movies came out, and also thinking back like historically. So like and I always get it's either 67 or 69. In 1967 or 1969 in the US, women were finally able to have their own bank accounts without having to have a man sign off on it. So like it's not great, but to a certain extent, like thinking back to like the historical context, like it makes sense why all those movies, or at least those Disney movies beforehand, ended in marriage, because at least it ended up in like financial stability. It was the only, or not the only way, but it was like a surefire way that you're going to be financially stable to get married to a man. And thinking back to Cinderella, now, you know, having my therapist hat on, one, it's not easy to leave an abusive situation, and especially an abusive situation with your family. It's very hard. And I think we do a lot of harm in general, not just with Cinderella, but like in general, when we kind of just like, why didn't you just leave? Why, you know, because family is complicated. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's like blood family or adopted family, or like in this case, like step family. It's they're family, and especially if you grew up with those people, especially during your like developmental ages. Like in the Cinderella animated movie, we don't necessarily know when or how long Cinderella has had her stepmother or stepsisters. Obviously, there's been spin-offs and sequel movies to the original Cinderella, as well as the live action Cinderella, but let's just assume that this happened like early on in her life, like developmentally. Like that's hard to leave her family, even if you to a certain extent like realize like I don't deserve to be treated this way. And not and unfortunately there's some people who don't even realize that they don't deserve to be this way. So with Cinderella, you know, I think you have to like take into consideration the context of not only when the movie was created, but also just the context of like when this movie is supposed to take place, which I want to say like the maybe 1700s, 1800s. I know those are two vastly different time periods, but so okay, so I know it came out in 1950s, but I know it's supposed to take place in like the 1700s or 1800s or something
Okay.
like that. But anyway, still 1950s, before women were allowed to have their own bank accounts. The thing with Cinderella is, it's not that she's weak. And I used to be like one of the people who are just like, oh my gosh, Cinderella is like the worst Disney princess. Because like why didn't she leave or whatever. But again, as I said, it's hard to leave abusive situations, especially with people who are supposed to be family. And then also, when I think about it, like Cinderella was super resilient. Like, I don't know about you, Natalie, but I feel like if I was in her position, I would not have been so nice. I don't know if I would have had so many wonderful animal friends who were making my dresses for me, who were willing to be turned into coachmans and horses for me. I would just been like, F you, F you, F you. And, I like, yeah, I probably wouldn't have been so resilient, or the ability to be kind, as much as Cinderella did. So, you know, let's be like realize that Cinderella was in a very tricky situation that is not as easy as some people realize. And for the situation that she was in until she got the outside help, because again, also we want to, I think it's important to realize that sometimes when people are in abusive situations, they do need outside help, and that is nothing wrong with that. So until she got that outside help of the prince coming and like, being able to secure a safe environment for her, like she was doing the best she could in that situation, which again is honestly commendable. So yeah, I think it's really interesting again, as you were saying, like thinking about like some of these Disney princesses in like different contexts than like just being like, oh, she didn't save herself, she must be a weak princess type of situation.
Right. And I'm thinking even about like Snow White, like the situation that she was in. Like she was on the run from like her evil
14 and on the run.
yeah, from her I guess another evil stepmother, right? Was his stepmother, right?
Yes, stepmother.
Right. So like the circumstances that she found herself in were really difficult, and lots of people I think give like Snow White some flack, like, oh, she went and lived with 7 men, and like that's problematic and things like that. But it's like, well, she had to hide herself. She had to be like low key. She found some nice people that would like take her in and help her out in that situation, right? And ultimately they were really helpful for escaping, the evil stepmother and all the goons that she sent after them, right? But like those are some really difficult situations that our Disney princesses were in that I honestly don't even know like how would I have even handled that situation. I don't know if I could have run away from home at 14 just so that I didn't have to be in like a toxic household where like my stepmother was jealous of me and like plotting for me to like, well, she was plotting for like to kill Snow White, but I think like that's the same as if like you have a like a toxic relationship at home where like they're just doing things that's malicious against you, right? Like those are circumstances where we might feel trapped in. But like I think it's really empowering to see that like these Disney princesses, they actually went and did something to change their circumstances, even though it may not be like totally in touch with reality, right? I don't know like how realistic it is for like an adolescent to just like run away from home or do all these things. But I think like that's some bravery that we don't always recognize with Disney princesses, because all we're so fixated on is like that ending where like the prince comes and then saves the princess. But also we don't recognize that like these princesses were trying to save themselves long before the princess came along.
Yeah, and I know like with Snow White, a lot of people are just like, yeah, I would not have eaten the apple, blah, blah, blah. But I'm just like, okay, fine. Maybe you wouldn't have eaten the apple, but would you have even made it to the point where you have gotten to like the living situation of the seven dwarfs? Would you have made it? I don't think I would have made it to that point. I think I would have been dead somewhere in a ditch, either by the huntsman or just by like getting lost in the forest. I probably would not have made it to the home of the seven dwarfs. So, come back to me when you can say confidently that you would have made it through that part, and then we can talk.
So Zori, let's talk about some of these newer Disney princesses, because I think with some of the newer Disney princesses we see less of like a prince entering the picture. And there's lots of other things going on where, like, I think these Disney princesses become more as, like, the heroines in the story opposed to, like, seeking a romance. But I think there's still, like, elements of romance in some of them.
Yeah, yeah, and there's some of them like Brave where they made like a whole big deal about how Merida doesn't need a man. She can create her own fate. She doesn't need to marry. And that one really focused on like the mother-daughter relationship and like the family relationship. I'm also thinking of Rhea, how that focused a lot on I mean, she had her own family. She had her father, but I think that like focused a lot on like found family and friendship, or how sometimes friendship breaks and maybe can potentially mend. So I think that was another one. Even like the Princess and the Frog, like I feel like that was like where Disney was like playing around, being like, will there be romance? And well, we not obviously we know it's the Princess and the Frog, so there's romance. But I feel like that's where they were kind of playing around with like a female protagonist that wasn't really interested in romance, and that wasn't necessarily her story. It wasn't like, oh, her full story. She's just not interested in romance. No, no. Her full story, her story for herself was she wanted to start a business. She wanted to make her dreams, make her father's dreams come true of like starting a restaurant and like being able to take care of her community, to take care of her mother. So like, the romance, even though because of the original source material, we know that there's going to be some level of romance. Mm-hmm. Like, she as a character wasn't necessarily centered on romance. Mm-hmm. If anything, I think one of the major things that she was struggling with is doing things for herself, not always working. But yeah, some of the later Disney princesses, even the honorary Disney princesses like Elsa and Anna, I'm not gonna let them go. Sure, with Anna, there were some romance between her and that like lumberjack guy. I forget his name, Kristoff, I think. But like still, that the movie was focused on sisterhood, right. And I think that's really interesting to think about too. Like even Rapunzel, like there was romance, right? But like it was still, I still feel like it wasn't like that wasn't the main focus of the movie, unlike some of the other, right. If that makes sense. But what do you think?
Well, I was thinking even like Rapunzel, I feel like that wasn't, the romance wasn't even really the center of it. I mean, of course the elements are there, but it's like, she hit him with a frying pan. Right? So I think like that just shows like, it wasn't like her goal to, find the prince that's going to free her and stuff like that. It was just part of like, I gotta get out of this tower and I gotta, be my own person kind of story. So I think like that's what I really appreciate with some of these newer Disney princesses, because I think it recognizes that there's different types of more meaningful, like, I guess not, sorry, different types of meaningful relationships in their life outside of just like a cis heterosexual kind of typical relationship too. So I think that's something that is really good, even for young girls to see that it's okay to, find more importance in your friendships, or it's okay that like you feel like you don't need a man to be yourself or be successful or to feel whole and things like that.
Yeah, or focus on your family.
Yeah. And like I think Moana was a really great one too, where it's like she wanted to save her village. She was the heroine in her village, and there was like the relationship that she cared about was like her community as a whole, which I think is like a really cool aspect to think about sometimes too, that we don't always think about. Like, what is our relationship to our bigger community? Like, what does family mean to us? What does found family mean to us? Because she also gathers up kind of like this ragtag group of people to help her just like save the village, right? So I think it's nice to see that the emphasis isn't just on like our traditional ideas of like girlhood is to pursue the romance and pursue like that relationship, but that there are other relationships that we can invest in. And those are equally
Mm-hmm.
important as some of our romantic relationships.
Yeah. And then also, like, this is slightly different, but also I think one thing that I was thinking about was like what makes like the like Snow White, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty different from some of the more recent. I think, especially, and maybe even, I feel like this, I didn't really see this too much until Mulan, where they allow the female protagonist to be funny, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, to be the butt of the joke. Like, I feel like in Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, they were just like this poise, dainty female character, graceful, you know. But in Mulan, she was getting she was getting beat up, especially in the training. And I can't. I don't think. Well, I know Ariel had like the whole like using forks for hair type of thing, but I don't know. I feel like in the later Disney princess, like they had a little bit more, I don't know, roughness.
Mm.
Like they were allowed to be a little bit more human.
Mm. Yeah, that's what came to mind, that they became real people. And I think like Mulan probably was a really good turning point for that too. Because I think Mulan in itself broke a lot of stereotypes of what do we think about in terms of like women and girls, because she didn't necessarily follow that same, I guess, like that same ideal of like you have to like be poised, like you were talking about, like dainty, because we clearly saw that she wasn't any of those things when she went to the matchmaker. Like she couldn't pour the tea right, she didn't know how to put on makeup well, and so like I think that was a turning point in giving girls more of a realness to them, that not everybody fits into these kind of ideal standards of what it means to be a girl or a woman. And I think Mulan actually, I think they had a lot of themes in there that I think were kind of revolutionary in that time period too, right? Because then
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of a little bit of like a joke in there, but then, they talked about how like, people were cross dressers and things like that. And like, when you look at it, Mulan is probably, you know, I guess like that's something that you think about when you think about people who are exploring identity and breaking out of those like gender stereotypes that we see, right? She embraced a lot of masculine figures. She was willing to change her appearance so that she can achieve her goals and things like that. And it was a really, I guess it's one of the first times in my life growing up that I saw somebody break out of that, like, that princess kind of mold of, like, I'm just gonna be, like, in a dress, I'm gonna be this girly girl. And I think for me, it resonated a lot because I grew up, like, feeling like I was more of a tomboy. And so I liked the
Mm-hmm.
roughness. I liked being able to not have to wear dresses and things like that. And Mulan like really made me feel seen in those moments as like a real
Mm-hmm.
person, that like, oh my gosh, there are other people out there that don't think that being a girl means that I'm just like waiting for Prince Charming, or I'm like putting on all this beautiful makeup and getting all dressed up and looking pretty. Like I could have different features, or I could like present in different ways, and that's still part of my identity as like a girl or a woman.
Mm-hmm. And like, granted, I'm not like Disney expert in terms of like research, in terms of like looking at the media literacy of it all, but I definitely feel like Mulan, there was, as much as possible with Disney, which isn't saying much, but as much as possible, I feel like there was like this shift away from like, I don't know, maybe like the male gaze a little bit. I do feel No, I feel like after Mulan that also happened as well, but it's like the Disney version of it where they're still pretty. Like even as a boy, like Mulan is still pretty, you know. Rapunzel is still beautiful. Mulan is still pretty, all those things. But I definitely, as you were saying, like I was thinking of like maybe the only other Disney character, and I think actually, when she came out, she was like the first Disney character who didn't wear a dress, Jasmine. But even like Jasmine felt very feminine in a way that like Mulan didn't. And I'm not saying that, or let me not say feminine because like I feel like there's different ways to like express feminism or the act of expression, not the theoretical viewpoint. But I think um Mulan played a role, and this is kind of what you're getting to a little bit, but I definitely seen until like Frozen came out, like Mulan being like that representation for a lot of LGBTQ plus like kids and folks. Um, Mulan and Shang as well, but like I feel like Mulan, if you ask like a lot of LGBTQ plus like Disney people around our age, I think they're going to say Mulan is their top movie because of that like fluidity in gender. I think that she has, or at least even if it's not necessarily prescri- prescribed that way in the movie, that's like talking about how um, the consumer, how the watcher kind of takes it, and I feel like that's something that some folks in regards to Disney didn't really get again until maybe like Elsa.
Mm. I think that talks about like the shifting changes and maybe like what we considered like traditional beauty for a lot, like the traditional beauty standards for women in our society, because I think we had a very narrow view of what traditional beauty looked like with the earlier Disney princesses, but then that really expanded as we got into some of the newer Disney princesses. Because I think, like, you're talking about how, like, these Disney princesses were still pretty, they're still beautiful in their own way, but it's not that traditional, like, beauty standard that we used to see. That was very, like, it almost feels prescribed, right? Like, this is how you had to be.
White, white, Eurocentric.
Right. And that's even a good point to like the diversity of women, or I guess like Disney princesses had changed so much over time too, where it's not like that Eurocentric kind of idea of like a girl or princess, but it's expanded to be like other races as well and different like gender expressions. And so I think like in some ways we've seen a lot more like progressive Disney princesses that I think is more reflective of society today for girls to see more of themselves in these current characters, because I don't know if like many girls today can look at like Snow White or Cinderella and say like, oh, that's me. Whereas like there's going to be girls who look at like Rhea and say like, oh my gosh, that is me in that character.
Yeah, and sharing a little bit. I think I shared this with Natalie before we started recording, but like when I was little, Belle used to be like one of my favorite princesses, and I really wanted like a Belle, like the yellow Belle dress, and they sold them at the like Disney store. And I remember even as like a really young kid, I like no one told me this, like my mom didn't say this or whatever, but like I remember distinctly having this thought like, oh, I really want that Belle dress, but I can't wear it because I'm black, because I'm not that color. And I think at that time, I think only Jasmine had came out, so I was like, okay, I'll wear Jasmine because at least like I'm closer to that skin color. Um, and I think I was dressed up as Jasmine for Halloween. But it wasn't insane. Like I wanted the Belle dress. But even young Zori was just like, no, that one is not for me. I don't
Mhm.
fit that beauty image.
Right. And I think that that's one of the confrontations I think we have to make as a society, just kind of like the internalized racism in some of these Disney princesses, and acknowledging like how that shifted, right? Because I think that that is something that lots of girls went through, of like, I really like this Disney princess, but I just can't be this Disney princess because it doesn't look like me. And I think there's so much shame that came with that as well for a lot of like young girls of color, because then it's like, well, does that mean I can't ever be a Disney princess because there aren't any Disney princesses that look like me?
Yeah, which is so funny because like now people are just like, oh no, like too many Disney princesses of color. Like who is my kid gonna find as a role model? One, Disney princess should not be your role model. And two, like what about all the other white? And again, I said I had that experience, but like I could have worn a bell dress. I could have worn a bell dress. It's just again, society had taught me that like, blah blah blah. So like, I've seen little videos of little white children. I can't remember. I felt like it was a white boy, but or like a white or it maybe assigned male at birth. But anyway, it was a white child wearing a Princess Tiana dress. And you know what? That actually made me happy. That made me happy. So it was like not saying that, oh, I couldn't do this, or even like Kids Today couldn't do it. It's just, again, realizing that representation does matter. And just because someone is getting their representation doesn't mean that you can't still relate to it. Doesn't mean that you can't still, you know, find positives from it as well. If it is so, yeah, sorry. That's my Disney soapbox. I'm still mad about the treatment of the Little Mermaid live action.
I don't think I ever saw the live action.
To be honest, I haven't either, but still, I'm mad at how many people were like, not my Ariel. Just like, shut up. Shut up. Your Ariel is a fish. She's a fish. She's a mythical fish. She was never a human to begin with. So all of your argument is already failing already. So just watch the Black Mermaid. Watch the Black Mermaid.
All right, well, I think that's it for our episode today. So thank you everybody for joining us on another episode of Therapy on a Tangent. If you liked what we talked about today, please remember to go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening. Give us a rating, review, and if you're on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. Hit that bell for us so that you get the updates. And if there's a topic that you would like to hear about in the future, you could either put it in the comments so we see it, or you could email us at therapyonatangentpod@gmail.com. So I'm Natalie.
And I'm Zori.
And until next time, stay on a tangent. Bye, folks.
Bye.